My name is Elizabeth Fairchild, though I have been called Mrs. Ezra Blackwood for the past 8 months. And I write these words by candlelight in what may be my final night in this mansion that has become my prison. Tomorrow I will either escape toward freedom with a man I love, or I will die trying. But I cannot spend another day pretending to be the dutiful wife of a monster. The marriage that brought me to Shadowmere Plantation was arranged by my father, Colonel William Fairchild, who had gambled away our family's cotton fortune and needed a wealthy son-in-law to prevent our complete social and financial ruin. Ezra Blackwood was the richest unmarried man in 3 counties. A plantation baron whose wealth came from the labor of 800 enslaved souls working his vast holdings along the Savannah River. Elizabeth, you will marry Mr. Blackwood, my father had announced on my 19th birthday, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. The arrangements have been made, the contract signed. The wedding will take place in 6 weeks, but, Papa, I had protested, I don't love him. I barely know him. Surely there must be another way to solve our financial difficulties. Love is a luxury that our family can no longer afford, he replied coldly. Blackwood's offer is generous enough to pay our debts and restore our position in society. You will do your duty as a daughter and accept this arrangement gratefully. Duty, the word that had defined my entire existence. The expectation that I would sacrifice my own happiness for the benefit of men who saw me as property to be traded for political and economic advantage. I had been raised to be ornamental rather than independent, educated in music and French and needlework, but never in anything that might allow me to support myself. Wedding was a grand affair attended by the most prominent families in South Carolina. A celebration of wealth and status that masked the reality of what was essentially a business transaction. I walked down the aisle in white silk while my heart died a little more with each step toward a future I dreaded. Ezra Blackwood was 45 years old with gray eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw, including his new wife. He was not physically repulsive, but there was something in his manner that made my skin crawl. A casual cruelty that revealed itself in how he spoke to servants and looked at people he considered beneath his station. You are very beautiful, my dear, he said during our wedding reception, his hand possessive on my arm. I trust you understand that beauty is meant to be enjoyed by those who can afford to possess it. Possessed, not loved or cherished, but possessed, like his horses or his silver or his human property. The word revealed everything I needed to know about how he viewed our marriage and my role in his life. Shadowmere Plantation was magnificent in the way that monuments to human suffering can be magnificent. A Greek Revival mansion with white columns and manicured gardens that had been built with the blood and sweat of people who would never be allowed to enjoy its beauty. The contrast between the elegance of the big house and the squalor of the slave quarters was a daily reminder of the system that created such luxury. Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Blackwood, Ezra said as our carriage approached the house. I trust you will find everything to your satisfaction. It's very impressive, I replied, though the sight of chained field hands working in the distance made my stomach turn with revulsion. Impressive and profitable, Ezra agreed with satisfaction. 800 slaves producing cotton, rice, and sugar cane, along with all the food and materials needed to maintain our lifestyle. It's a perfect self-contained world, perfect for him, perhaps, but not for the hundreds of human beings who made his wealth possible. I had grown up on a small plantation where our dozen slaves were treated with relative kindness. But Shadowmere operated on a scale and with a brutality that shocked even someone raised in the slave-owning South. The house itself was luxurious beyond anything I had experienced, with Persian rugs and crystal chandeliers and furniture imported from Europe, but it felt cold and lifeless, more like a museum than a home. The servants moved through the rooms like ghosts, their eyes downcast and their voices barely audible. The staff knows to cater to your every need, Ezra explained as we toured the house, but remember that kindness can be mistaken for weakness. These people respect strength and clear boundaries. Strength, meaning cruelty. Clear boundaries, meaning the constant threat of violence. I was beginning to understand that my new husband's wealth was built not just on slave labor, but on the systematic terrorizing of human beings who had no legal protection. From his whims, my first week at Shadowmere was spent learning the routines of my new life, managing the household staff, entertaining Ezra's business associates, playing the role of gracious hostess while my soul withered from the proximity to such casual evil. I watched from the parlor windows as overseers drove field hands with whips, as families were separated for infractions, real or imagined. "You seem troubled, my dear," Ezra observed one evening as we dined on food prepared by enslaved cooks and served by enslaved hands. "Is the adjustment to plantation life proving difficult? I'm still learning," I replied carefully. "Everything is so much larger in scale. Then what I'm accustomed to scale brings efficiency," Ezra said with pride, "and efficiency brings profit. You'll find that Shadowmere's methods produce results that smaller operations cannot match results, meaning cotton bales built on human misery. Profit extracted from people who saw none of the benefits of their labor." I was beginning to understand that I had not just married a wealthy man, but a systematic destroyer of human dignity. The breaking point came 3 weeks into my residence at Shadowmere, when I witnessed Ezra ordering the flogging of a young woman whose only crime had been spilling water while serving dinner. The casual way he sentenced her to 20 lashes revealed the true nature of the man I had been forced to marry. "Please," I said quietly after the servants had left. "Surely such punishment is excessive for an accident. Accidents become habits without proper correction." Ezra replied without emotion. "Slaves must understand that carelessness has consequences. Kindness is interpreted as permission for further mistakes. But 20 lashes for spilling water, 20 lashes for forgetting her place?" Ezra corrected sharply. "For thinking that because she serves in the big house, she can be careless with valuable property, valuable property." He was more concerned about the cost of replacing a water glass than about the pain he was inflicting on a human being. That night I lay in the bed I was forced to share with him and wept for the woman being whipped and for myself. Trapped in this nightmare it was during one of my walks through the plantation grounds, ostensibly to inspect the gardens, but actually to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house, that I first noticed Daniel. He was working on repairs to the carriage house, skilled hand shaping wood with the precision of someone who understood. His crafty was perhaps 25 years old, with intelligent eyes and a bearing that suggested dignity. Despite his circumstances, when he saw me approaching, he straightened and removed his hat respectfully. But he didn't show the cowering fear that marked most interactions between slaves and their masters. "Good morning, ma'am," he said politely. "I hope the noise from my work isn't disturbing your walk." "Not at all," I replied, surprised by his articulate speech and the courtesy of his concern. "Your work looks very skilled. You're a carpenter by training." "Yes, ma'am. My father taught me the trade before he was sold away," Daniel said, a flash of pain crossing his features. "I've been maintaining the buildings here for Master Blackwood for 3 years now. 3 years of witnessing the same horrors that were breaking my spirit after only 3 weeks. Yet he maintained his humanity and dignity in ways that shamed my own weakness." There was something in his manner that made me want to continue the conversation despite the social taboos that made such interactions dangerous. "You speak very well," I observed, then immediately regretted the comment as condescending. "My mother taught me letters when I was young." Daniel replied simply. "She said education was the one thing that couldn't be taken away. Though I suppose she was wrong about that too. Education that couldn't be taken away. Dignity that survived despite systematic attempts to destroy it." Here was someone who understood loss and injustice in ways that my privileged upbringing had never taught me. "I should let you return to your work," I said, suddenly conscious that we had been talking longer than was appropriate. "Yes, ma'am." Daniel agreed, but as I turned to leave, he added quietly, "If you ever need anything repaired around the house, ma'am, I'm always available to help thee." Offer was simple and professional, but something in his tone suggested depths of meaning that I was only beginning to understand. Here was kindness offered without expectation, service provided with dignity rather than servility. That evening at dinner, I found myself thinking about Daniel's words and manner, comparing his quiet strength to Ezra's casual cruelty. One man who had lost everything but retained his humanity, another who possessed everything but seemed to have lost his soul. "You're very quiet tonight," Ezra observed. "Are you feeling unwell? Just tired?" I replied, though what I was really feeling was a kind of moral exhaustion from living in close proximity to systematic evil. "Perhaps you should spend less time wandering the grounds," Ezra suggested. "There are better ways for a lady to occupy her time than inspecting slave quarters and work areas." He had been watching me, or having me watched. The realization that my movements were being monitored added another layer to the prison that my life had become. "I enjoy the gardens," I said carefully, "and I like to understand how the plantation operates." "Understanding is fine," Faye replied, "but remember that there are proper boundaries between the big house and the quarters. Boundaries that exist for good reasons. Boundaries designed to prevent exactly what was happening to me. The recognition that enslaved people were human beings deserving of dignity and respect. Boundaries that kept owners from seeing their victims as anything more than property." That night, I lay awake thinking about Daniel's quiet dignity and wondering what kind of life he might have lived if he had been born free. What contributions he might have made to the world if his talents and intelligence had been allowed to flourish. Was beginning to understand that my comfortable life was built on the destruction of lives like his, that every luxury I enjoyed had been paid for with someone else's suffering. The knowledge was becoming unbearable. 3 days later, I found an excuse to walk past the carriage house again, hoping to continue my conversation with Daniel, needing to hear his voice and see his face as antidotes to the poison of my daily existence with Ezra. "Good morning," I said as he looked up from his work. "How are the repairs progressing?" "Very well, ma'am," Daniel replied. "Should be finished by tomorrow. Master Blackwood will have his carriage ready for his trip to Charleston, where Ezra conducted business with other plantation owners, where deals were made that affected the lives of hundreds of people who had no voice in their own destinies." "Do you ever think about Charleston?" I asked impulsively. "About what it would be like to visit there as a free person?" Daniel's hand stilled on his tools, and he looked at me with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Every day, ma'am," he said quietly, "I think about what it would be like to choose where I go and what I do with my time. And if you could choose," I pressed, "what would you choose to do?" "I'd want to build things," Daniel said, his voice growing stronger. "Real things. Houses and furniture and maybe a workshop of my own. I'd want to use these hands for creating instead of just maintaining someone else's property. Creating instead of maintaining. Building instead of serving." The dreams he described were simple but revolutionary in the context of his circumstances. They were also the kinds of dreams I had never been allowed to pursue as a woman in Southern society. "Those are beautiful dreams," I said softly. "I hope someday you'll have the chance to pursue them." "Thank you, ma'am," Daniel replied. "That's kind of you to say." Kind. As if basic human decency towards someone in his situation was remarkable rather than simply right. The conversation left me even more determined to find ways to resist the system that had trapped us both. Albeit in very different ways, I was beginning to fall in love with Daniel, though I hardly dared to admit it even to myself. Love across the racial divide was not just socially unacceptable, but legally dangerous. Yet I couldn't deny the growing attraction I felt to his strength, his intelligence, and his ability to maintain hope despite impossible circumstances. More than that, I was beginning to understand that loving Daniel meant more than just personal feelings. It meant choosing to see enslaved people as human beings deserving of freedom and dignity. It meant rejecting everything I had been taught about racial hierarchy and social order. Realization was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Terrifying because it meant abandoning everything I had been raised to believe. Liberating because it offered the possibility of living according to my conscience rather than social expectations. Was Mrs. Ezra Blackwood trapped in a marriage to a man I despised, but I was also Elizabeth's Fairchild. A woman capable of choosing love over convention, justice over comfort, truth over the lies that sustained the world I had been born into. The choice was becoming clear. Even if the path forward remained dangerous and uncertain as autumn painted the South Carolina countryside in shades of gold and crimson. My secret. Meetings with Daniel became the only moments of genuine joy in my increasingly desperate existence. We would encounter each other during my daily walks, exchanging words that seemed innocent enough to any observer but carried deeper meanings. That sustained us both through the darkness of our circumstances. The leaves are beautiful this time of year, I might say, as I found him working in the gardens. Yes, ma'am, he would reply. Beautiful things have a way of surviving, even when everything around them is dying, surviving, persisting, enduring. Our conversations were filled with such coded references to hope and resistance, creating a private language that allowed us to share thoughts and feelings that could not be spoken. Directly Ezra's business trip to Charleston provided our first opportunity for an extended conversation. With the master away for 3 days and the plantation running under the relaxed supervision of his subordinates, I found Daniel working alone in his workshop behind the carriage house. "May I come in?" I asked, though I was already crossing the threshold into his domain. "Of course, ma'am," Daniel replied, setting down his tools and offering me the only chair in the small space. "Though I'm afraid it's not very suitable for a lady, it's perfect," I said honestly, looking around at the neat organization of tools and wood. The careful craftsmanship evident in everything from the shelving to the workbench itself. "You've built all of this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. Master Blackwood allows me to use scrap materials for my own projects as long as I complete his work first," Daniel explained. "It helps pass the time and keeps my skills sharp." Helps pass the time. As if the hours of a human life were simply something to be endured rather than lived. The casual way he accepted such limitations broke my heart. "Daniel," I said, using his name for the first time. "May I ask you something personal?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. Though I could see tension in his shoulders, "Do you ever think about escape? About trying to reach the Free States?" The question was dangerous for both of us. Discussing escape plans could result in death for him and serious legal consequences for me. But I needed to know if he shared the dreams of freedom that were consuming my thoughts. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of test. "I think about it every day," he said finally, "but thinking and doing are different things. The risks are enormous and the chances of success are small but not impossible." I pressed. "People do escape. They do reach freedom. Some do," Daniel agreed. "But for every person who makes it north, dozens are caught and punished in ways that make death seem merciful, and yet you still think about it? How could I not?" Daniel replied with quiet intensity. "How could anyone with half a brain not dream of living as a free person? Of choosing their own work and keeping the fruits of their labor? What if?" I said carefully, "What if you had help, resources, connections that could improve your chances?" Daniel's eyes widened as he began to understand what I was suggesting. "Ma'am, you can't be serious. The danger to you would be enormous. If Master Blackwood discovered that his own wife was helping slaves escape, he's not going to discover anything," I said with more confidence than I felt, "and I can't continue to live in this house, in this system, without doing something to resist it." "But why?" Daniel asked. "Why would you risk everything for people like me? People like me, as if his humanity was somehow different from or lesser than mine." The phrase revealed how completely the system had trained even its victims to accept their supposed inferiority because. "You're not people like you," I said firmly. "You're just people. Human beings who deserve the same freedoms and opportunities that I was born with by accident of race and class and because." I added more quietly, "I've come to care about what happens to you, specifically to you." The admission hung in the air between us. It's dangerous and beautiful and completely honest. I was telling an enslaved man that cared about him in ways that transcended the acceptable boundaries of our society. "Mrs. Blackwood," Daniel said softly, "Elizabeth, You don't understand what you're saying. I understand exactly what I'm saying. I replied, I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Daniel. With your strength and your dignity and your refusal to let this system destroy your humanity, you can't love me. Daniel said, though his eyes suggested he wanted desperately for my words to be true. The world we live in doesn't allow for such feelings between people like us. The world we live in is wrong. I said simply, and I refuse to let wrong laws and evil customs dictate what I can and cannot feel, even if you mean what you say. Daniel replied, what future could we possibly have together? Where could we go that would accept a white woman and a black man as equals the North? I said. Canada, somewhere that recognizes love as more important than racial prejudice. You would give up everything, Daniel asked incredulously. Your position, your wealth, your family, your entire life. For me, I would give up a life built on lies and cruelty for a life built on truth and love. I corrected, that's not a sacrifice. Daniel, that's salvation. I could see him struggling with the impossibility of what I was proposing, trying to balance hope against the harsh realities of our circumstances. Love against the practical dangers we would face if we were to attempt such a thing. He said carefully, it would have to be planned perfectly. We would only get one chance, and failure would mean death for me and probably for you as well. Then we'll have to make sure we don't fail, I said, reaching across the space between us to take his hand the moment our fingers touched. Everything changed. The careful distance we had maintained dissolved into an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for weeks. He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes, Elizabeth. He whispered, I've loved you since the first day we spoke. But I never dared to hope that you might feel the same way I feel everything. I said, love, hope, determination to build a life with you. Somewhere we can be free to choose each other. We kissed then, softly and carefully, as if we were afraid the moment might shatter if we moved too quickly. It was my first kiss, born of love rather than duty. My first taste of what it meant to choose intimacy rather than submit to it. We have to be careful, Daniel said when we finally pulled apart. If anyone suspects what's happening between us, they'll separate us immediately. I know, I agreed. But I also know that I can't pretend much longer. I can't keep playing the dutiful wife to a man who disgusts me while hiding my feelings for the man I actually love. How long do you think we have, Daniel asked, before Blackwood becomes suspicious of your behavior? Not long, I admitted. He's already commenting on my distraction, my lack of enthusiasm for his company. If I continue to change, he'll start investigating the reasons. Then we need to act soon, Neal said, before suspicion leads to discovery. Do you know anything about the Underground Railroad? I asked about how people make contact with conductors. Some, Daniel replied cautiously. There are rumors. Stories about certain people who might help. But it's dangerous to ask too many questions. I have money, I said. Jewelry. Resources that could buy passage or assistance. Money helps. Daniel agreed. But the real currency is trust. And trust takes time to establish, time that we might not have. But I was determined to find a way. The alternative was spending the rest of my life married to Ezra while the man I loved remained enslaved and vulnerable to his master's whims. There's something else, I said, something that makes our situation even more urgent. What Ezra has been talking about, expanding his holdings. Buying land in Mississippi and Alabama, and he's mentioned taking some of his most skilled workers with him, including me. Daniel said with understanding, including you, I confirmed. If he decides to relocate you to a new plantation hundreds of miles away, we might never see each other again. The thought of permanent separation gave urgency to our planning. We couldn't afford to wait for perfect conditions or ideal opportunities. We would have to create our own chance and pray that love and determination were enough to overcome the obstacles in our path. There's a woman in Charleston, Daniel said slowly, a free black seamstress who some people say has connections to the railroad. If I could get a message to her how the laundry from the big house goes to town twice a week. Daniel explained. If I could hide a letter in the bundle, find a way to get it to her, what would the letter say that two people need help reaching the north? Daniel said, one enslaved, one free but in danger. Both willing to pay whatever prices necessary for passage, the plan was dangerous and uncertain, but it was better than waiting passively for circumstances to destroy any possibility of happiness. I was ready to risk everything for the chance to live as a free woman with the man I loved when Ezra returns from Charleston. I said, I'll find a way to get money and jewelry without arousing suspicion. You work on making contact with your seamstress friend, and if she can't help us, then we'll find another way. I said with determination, or we'll create one ourselves. I refuse to accept that love like ours is impossible. Just because the world says it is, you realize? Daniel said that if we do this, if we run away together, there's no going back. You'll never again be able to live as a white woman of privilege. Good. I replied without hesitation. I never want to live that way again. I want to live as a person who chooses love over comfort, justice over security, truth over the lies that make slavery possible. As I prepared to leave his workshop and return to the big house, Daniel caught my hand one more time. Elizabeth, he said, whatever happens, I want you to know that loving you has given me hope I thought I'd lost forever. You've reminded me that there's still goodness in the world, and you, I replied, have shown me what real strength looks like. What it means to maintain dignity and humanity despite impossible circumstances. We were planning treason against the system that had created us, choosing love that society deemed impossible, risking death for the chance to live as equals. But as I walked back to the house where my husband waited, I felt more alive than I had since childhood. The next phase of our lives was about to begin, and though I couldn't predict what challenges lay ahead, I knew that facing them with Daniel would be infinitely better than facing anything alone. The woman who had been forced to marry Ezra Blackwood was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone brave enough to fight for the life she wanted rather than accepting the life she had been given. Ezra's return from Charleston brought with it an intensity of suspicion that made my skin crawl. He studied my face during dinner as if looking for evidence of betrayal, asked pointed questions about how I had spent my time in his absence, and made comments that suggested he was testing my reactions. I trust you found ways to occupy yourself while I was away, he said over our evening meal, his tone casual, but his eyes watchful. I read, took walks in the garden, supervised the household staff. I replied with what I hoped was convincing normalcy. The usual activities of a plantation mistress and You spoke with no one unusual, encountered nothing out of the ordinary, nothing at all. I lied smoothly. Though my heart was racing, it was a very quiet 3 days good. Ezra said, though he didn't look convinced, I would hate to think that my wife was becoming too familiar with the slaves. Such relationships can lead to unfortunate complications. His euphemism for the love that was, transforming my life and giving me courage to resist everything he represented. I forced myself to smile and nod as if I shared his concerns. Of course not, I said. I understand the importance of maintaining proper boundaries, but even as I spoke the words that he wanted to hear, I was planning how to smuggle money and jewelry from my room without arousing suspicion, how to pass messages to Daniel, how to maintain the facade of dutiful wife while preparing for the most dangerous gamble of my life. The opportunity came 2 days later when Ezra announced that he would be hosting a dinner party for potential business partners, an elaborate affair that would require my full attention as hostess and provide perfect cover for the preparations I want everything to be perfect. Ezra instructed, these men represent opportunities for significant expansion of our operations. First impressions will be crucial. I'll make sure every detail is attended to, I promised, already calculating how the chaos of party preparation could mask my real activities. The week leading up to the dinner was a masterpiece of deception. I supervised menu planning while hiding jewelry in my bodice, discussed floral arrangements while concealing gold coins in my shoes, played the role of gracious hostess while my mind raced with escape plans. My secret meetings with Daniel became Even more precious and dangerous, stolen moments in his workshop where we shared information and planned our future while knowing that discovery could mean immediate death for him, and probably for me as well, the seamstress in Charleston sent word. Daniel told me during one of these clandestine encounters, she can help, but it will be expensive and dangerous. How expensive? $500. Daniel said, plus whatever jewelry or valuables we can provide. $500 was an enormous sum, more than most people saw in years of labor. But I had been systematically gathering resources from my own possessions and taking small amounts from Ezra's. Cash reserves, I can get the money, I said with confidence. What about the danger we would have to reach Charleston without being discovered? Daniel explained. Then hide in a safe house while arrangements are made for passage north. The entire journey could take weeks, and there would be multiple points where we could be captured. And if we're captured, death, Daniel said simply. For me, certainly. For you, probably. Helping slaves escape is considered treason against the Southern way of life. Treason against a way of life built on human bondage. If that was treason, then I was proud to be a traitor, proud to choose love and justice over loyalty to an evil system when I asked, when do we make our move soon? Daniel replied, the seamstress said that winter travel is safer because there are fewer people on the roads, fewer opportunities for casual encounters that might expose us after the dinner party. I decided, once Ezra's attention is focused on his new business arrangements, I'll have more freedom to move without constant surveillance. Are you certain about this? Daniel asked, taking my hands in his. Once we run, there's no going back. You'll be giving up everything you've ever known for an uncertain future with a man the world considers your inferior. You're not my inferior. I said fiercely, you're my equal in every way that matters. And I'd rather face uncertainty with you than security without you. I love you. Daniel said simply, more than I've ever loved anything, but I need to know that you understand what you're sacrificing. I understand that I'm sacrificing a life of lies for a life of truth. I replied, comfort built on others' suffering for whatever happiness we can build together. The dinner party itself was a surreal experience. Smiling and making conversation with men who traded in human flesh while knowing that I was planning to betray everything they represented. Listening to discussions of expansion and profit while mentally calculating routes to freedom, Mrs. Blackwood, said one of the guests, a plantation owner from Georgia. Your husband tells me you've adapted well to life at Chattamere. It's been an education. I replied truthfully, though not in the way he imagined. The scale of operations here is impressive. Another guest observed 800 slaves producing multiple crops. It's a model of efficiency. My husband is very proud of his methods, I said, managing to keep my voice neutral despite my revulsion, as he should be. The first man agreed, maximizing productivity while minimizing costs. That's the key to success in our business. The casual way they discussed human beings as units of production made my stomach turn. But I forced myself to smile and nod while planning their ultimate betrayal after. The guests departed, and Ezra retired to his study to review business proposals. I made my final preparations, counting the money and jewelry I had accumulated. Writing a letter to my family, explaining my decision. Preparing for a journey that would transform me from Southern belle to fugitive tomorrow night. I whispered to Daniel during our last meeting in his workshop. Ezra will be distracted with correspondence from his new partners. The household will settle into its evening routine. We'll have our best chance. The wagon will be waiting at the crossroads 2 miles north of the plantation. Daniel confirmed, the driver is part of the network. He'll take us to the first safe house, and from there we trust in God and the goodness of people who risk their lives to help others find freedom, Daniel said. We trust in love being stronger than hatred. Justice being stronger than oppression. I trust in us, I said, kissing him with all the passion and hope I carried. I trust in the life we're going to build together. The next evening passed with agonizing slowness. Every casual comment from Ezra seemed loaded with suspicion. Every glance from the house servants felt like potential betrayal. But finally, the household settled into quiet, and our moment arrived. I slipped from my room wearing the darkest dress I owned, carrying a small bag with our resources and a few precious possessions. My heart pounding so loudly I was certain it could be heard throughout the house. Daniel was waiting in the shadows near the kitchen garden, his own small bundle slung over his shoulder, his face a mixture of determination and fear that probably mirrored my own. "Ready," he whispered. "Ready," I confirmed. Though I had never been less ready for anything in my life, we moved through the darkness like ghosts, avoiding the paths that guards might patrol, using Daniel's intimate knowledge of the plantation's geography to find routes that would hide our passage. The crossroads seemed impossibly far away. Every sound made us freeze in terror. Every shadow could hide discovery and disaster. But finally, we saw the outline of a wagon waiting beneath the ancient oak that marked our rendezvous point. "You, the folks heading north?" asked the driver, a grizzled man whose face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "We are," I replied, my voice steady, despite my fear. "Climb in back and get under the tarp," he instructed. "Next few hours are the most dangerous. Once we reach the safe house, you can breathe easier." As Daniel helped me into the wagon and we arranged ourselves beneath the canvas that would hide us from casual observation, I felt the last threads connecting me to my old life snap forever. Was no longer Mrs. Ezra Blackwood, wealthy plantation mistress. I was Elizabeth in love with Daniel, fugitive from injustice, woman brave enough to choose her own destiny despite the cost. No turning back now, Daniel whispered as the wagon lurched into motion. "No turning back," I agreed. And no regrets, the wheels rolled through the South Carolina night, carrying us toward freedom or death, toward a future we would write ourselves rather than accept from others, toward the proof that love really could conquer the artificial barriers that divided human beings from their common humanity behind us. Shadowmere Plantation slept in ignorance of our escape. Ezra dreaming of expanded wealth built on expanded misery, unaware that his wife had chosen to become his enemy. In the war between justice and oppression ahead of us lay uncertainty, danger, and the possibility of happiness beyond anything either of us had dared to imagine. The woman who had been forced to marry the wealthy plantation baron was gone forever, replaced by someone brave enough to escape with her enslaved lover toward whatever freedom they could find or create together. The journey north was a month-long odyssey through a network of safe houses, hidden attics, and secret passages maintained by people who risked everything to help strangers find freedom. We traveled by night and hid by day, always listening for the sound of pursuit that could mean capture and deaths. The first safe house was a modest farm outside Charleston run by a Quaker family named Miller. They welcomed us with the calm efficiency of people who had helped dozens of others make similar journeys, providing food, clean clothes, and most importantly, hope that our desperate gamble might actually succeed. "You're the first mixed couple we've assisted," Mrs. Miller observed as she served us our first hot meal in days. "The dangers for you are somewhat different than what most runaways face." "Different how?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "A white woman traveling with a black man attracts attention," she explained gently. "People notice such unusual arrangements, which makes concealment more difficult." "Are you saying we should travel separately?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with concern. "Not necessarily," Mr. Miller interjected, "but we may need to be creative about how we present your relationship. Perhaps as a mistress traveling with her servant, or a widow accompanied by her late husband's freed slave." The deception felt wrong after everything we had been through to acknowledge our love openly. But I understood the practical necessity of maintaining disguises that would allow us to travel without arousing suspicion. "Whatever story keeps us together and gets us to freedom," I said firmly. "I'll play whatever role is necessary. The important thing," Mrs. Miller added warmly, "is that you're following your hearts despite impossible circumstances. Love like yours deserves to triumph over the artificial barriers that society creates." Their acceptance of our relationship was the first validation we had received from the outside world. Proof that not everyone shared the prejudices that had forced us to become fugitives. The second leg of our journey took us to a safe house in North Carolina operated by a free black minister who had established an entire network of support for escaped slaves. His small church served as both worship space and way station for people seeking freedom. Sister Elizabeth. He said when Mrs. Miller brought us to his door, "Brother Daniel, welcome to our community. You are safe here and among friends who understand your struggle, sister and brother." Titles that acknowledged our shared humanity rather than our different races. In his presence, we could drop the pretense of master and servant and simply be. To people in love seeking a place where they could live openly, how much further to true safety? Daniel asked during our 3-day stay at the church, "Depends what you mean by safety." The minister replied thoughtfully, "Legal safety comes when you cross into Pennsylvania, but social safety, the kind that lets you live as equals, that's harder to find even in the free states, but it exists." I pressed, "It exists," he confirmed. "In communities where people judge by character rather than color, in places where love is seen as more important than prejudice, you'll find such places. If you're patient and persistent." The third safe house was a farmstead in Virginia, run by a German immigrant family who barely spoke English, but communicated perfectly through gestures of kindness and welcome. They hid us in their root cellar while slave catchers searched the area, their own children bringing us food and water while maintaining perfect silence about our presence. "Why do you help people like us?" I asked the father through his English-speaking neighbor who served as translator. "Because all people deserve to be free," came his translated reply. "Because helping others find freedom honors the freedom that brought my family to America." Simple. Wisdom from people who understood that freedom was not diminished by sharing it, but multiplied. Their example reminded me that goodness existed in unexpected places among people who had never enjoyed privilege, but still chose to help others. The most dangerous moment of our journey came near the Maryland border when our wagon was stopped by a patrol searching for escaped slaves. We had been traveling as mistress and servant, but the officer in charge seemed suspicious of our story. "Where are you headed, ma'am?" he asked. Studying my face carefully, "Baltimore," I replied as calmly as possible, "to visit my sister who is recently widowed, and this boy," he continued, gesturing toward Daniel, "my late husband's body servant." I said, hating the words but understanding their necessity, "I'm taking him north to be sold. As he reminds me too painfully of my loss, the lie tasted like poison in my tea. I stayed like poison in my mouth, but it satisfied the officer's suspicions and allowed us to continue our journey toward freedom." "I'm sorry," I whispered to Daniel once we were safely away from the patrol. "I'm sorry for those words, for pretending that you were property instead of the man I love you, did what was necessary to keep us safe." Daniel replied, "Words can't change what's real between us. And what's real is that we're free people choosing each other, free people." The phrase had never felt more precious or more true. Despite our fugitive status, we were freer than we had ever been in our old lives. Free to love openly, free to make our own choices, free to build whatever future we could imagine. The Pennsylvania border was marked by nothing more than a weathered sign, but crossing it felt like stepping into a different world. For the first time since leaving South Carolina, we could travel openly during daylight, could speak to each other without fear, could begin to imagine what permanent freedom might look like. "We made it," Daniel said as we stood on free soil for the first time. "We actually made it. We made the first part," I corrected. "Now we have to figure out how to build a life." The Quaker community that welcomed us in southeastern Pennsylvania provided temporary shelter while we considered our options. They were kind and supportive, but also realistic about the challenges we would face as an interracial couple. "Even in a free state, the law may not recognize slavery here," explained our host, "but prejudice exists everywhere. You'll need to find a community that values love more than convention." "Are there such communities?" I asked. "Yes," he replied with certainty. "Progressive cities, abolitionist settlements, places where people who have fought against slavery understand that love knows no color. We chose Philadelphia, drawn by its reputation as a center of abolitionists. activity, and its large population of free blacks who had built their own institutions and communities. The city offered both anonymity and opportunity for people seeking to start over. Our first apartment was a single room above a bakery in a neighborhood where mixed couples were uncommon but not unknown. We furnished it with secondhand items bought with the money I had saved from my jewelry. Creating our first home together as free people, it's not much, I said as we arranged our few possessions in the tiny space. It's everything, Daniel replied. It's ours, chosen by us, paid for with our own money, filled with our own love. I found work as a seamstress, skills learned in my privileged youth, now serving to support our modest but independent life. Daniel was hired as a carpenter by a Quaker businessman who valued his expertise over his race. Within months, we were earning enough to dream of bigger things. What do you want most? I asked one evening as we sat together planning our future. I want to marry you, Daniel said without hesitation. Properly, legally, in a church that recognizes our love as sacred. Is that possible? Here it is, Daniel replied. Pennsylvania law allows marriages between people of different races. We could be husband and wife in the eyes of both God and the state. The wedding took place 6 months after our arrival in Philadelphia. In a small Methodist church that welcomed all couples regardless of race, I wore a simple blue dress that I had sewn myself. Daniel wore his best suit bought with his carpenter's wages. Do you, Elizabeth, take Daniel to be your lawfully wedded husband? The minister asked. I do, I replied, meaning those words more deeply than any I had ever spoken. Do you, Daniel, take Elizabeth to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Daniel answered, his voice strong and clear by the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The minister declared, I pronounce you husband and wife, what God has joined together. Let no man put asunder. The kiss that sealed our marriage was sweet, with the taste of freedom finally achieved. Surrounded by friends who had chosen to celebrate love triumphing over prejudice 3 years later. We owned our own small house with a workshop where Daniel built furniture for customers throughout the city. I had expanded my seamstress business to employ 2 other women. We were expecting our first child. Do you ever regret it? Daniel asked one evening as we sat on our front porch watching the sunset. Giving up your old life for this one? I never had a life before, I replied honestly. I had existence. I had survival. But this is the first time I've ever truly lived, even though we face prejudice. Even though some people refuse to accept us, especially because of that, I said, because choosing love despite opposition proves that love is stronger than hatred, that justice is stronger than tradition. And our child? Daniel asked, his hand resting on my growing belly. What kind of world will we be bringing him into? A world that's slowly changing, I said with conviction. A world where each child, born to parents who chose love over convention, makes the next choice a little easier. Her, Daniel corrected with a smile. I think it's going to be a daughter. Then she'll grow up knowing that her mother was brave enough to escape from a life of lies for a life of truth. I said that her father was strong enough to maintain his dignity despite systematic oppression, that her parents loved each other enough to risk everything for the chance to be together as darkness fell over Philadelphia. I reflected on the journey that had brought us from a plantation in South Carolina to a home we owned in a free state, from a system that defined us as master and slave to a life where we were simply husband and wife. Woman who had been forced to marry Ezra Blackwood was gone forever, remembered only in nightmares that grew less frequent with each passing year, replaced by Elizabeth Miller, wife of Daniel, mother to be. Woman who had learned that love really could conquer the most entrenched prejudices when backed by sufficient. Corrigai had escaped with my enslaved lover. But what we had really achieved was much more profound. We had proven that human dignity could not be legislated away, that love recognized no artificial boundaries, that freedom was worth any price when shared with the right person. The price had been everything I thought I valued, but the reward was everything that actually mattered. A life built on truth rather than lies, love rather than duty. Justice, rather than the convenience of an evil system. Our story would become part of the larger story of people who refuse to accept injustice as permanent, who chose to fight for their right to love and live according to their own consciences, who prove that some barriers exist only in the minds of those too weak to challenge them. The plantation baron's wife had become a fugitive, but more importantly, she had become free.